Jay, it's a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you.
You have been on the scene for many, many years, most importantly after McKinsey, then Centel, and then Fieldglass, which was in solar. So there's a whole journey. What we try to do is to take lessons from people like you and show that as a life story of success to emerging entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to give advice to somebody to start something like what you did in the past, what would be the 2 or 3 things?
I would say for someone who's looking to be an entrepreneur, they should be driven more by the sense of the opportunity and the size of their opportunity, and less by the resources they have at their disposal. That's the fundamental difference between an entrepreneur and a manager. A manager looks at the resources they have and say, based on this amount of money and this amount of people, this is what I can do, that's all I'll promise. An entrepreneur generally has nothing, so they don't have that issue. They don't usually have a budget or anything like that. So they are much more driven by what is the disruptive change I can make in the world, and their energy and their ability to persuade is the main skill that they bring to the table. So if they do that well, then the resources will somehow show up. People will invest, others will join them on their journey. That is the main advice, which is a mindset advice. I think a second advice would be you can't ignore the domain that you're operating in. So in my case, Fieldglass built out what we call a vendor management system or services procurement, and the problem we were solving is that large companies have very large contingent workforces, and there was no good way for those to be handled. So we built out a platform, and plenty of others did too. We were the 5th or 6th firm to do it, but we were the only ones who really succeeded in monetizing the business. Why is that? And I think part of the answer is that we were very deep in the domain. I worked here at Centel in the IT services space. At McKinsey, I was able to advise people about this problem. So I was marinating in this problem for many, many years. I think most of the competitors either came from a software background or from some other thing other than being in the domain. So my second advice would be get deep in the domain before you start something, or you will lose to someone who is deep in the domain.
You raise a very valid point. Domain expertise is very important. But once you get that, so people who don't have the entrepreneur or management experience, like in your case, these are nerds who are more techies, 10, 15 years, and they come out and they want to start an enterprise.
Nerds rule anyway.
But beyond that, entrepreneurship is a very different ballgame. You need to have a very cohesive team who can do different things for you.
Yes.
So building a team is very, very important.
It is.
So any advice on that?
Well, there's no getting away from the managerial skill either. So, in my earlier observation, the managerial skill becomes very important once the business gets going. So you have to be able to attract people, and the blocking and tackling, have to be learned. Which is why there are very few entrepreneurs. The Gateses and the Zuckerbergs of the world are pretty rare creatures. Those are not easy to emulate. And for the rest of us, we should have either worked in an organization or, somehow, well, I would say worked in an organization or in the domain for a number of years before you decide to go off and jump and do something. It'll be very hard to learn those essential skills while you're trying to build a company.
The second piece is funding. Every entrepreneur you run into, no matter what advice you want to give them, can you help us with fundraising? And I keep telling them that is not the first thing you have to think around. So your take on that?
So it's very true. It's almost like saying, I want to run a race, can you help me run the race? And fundraising is an essential part of persuading the world that your vision makes sense. So if someone is having trouble fundraising, it's, as we know, not for lack of capital. There's plenty of capital out there. It's because you haven't been able to craft a persuasive argument on why you have a business that will scale, is profitable, and will exit at some point, and that's the issue. So you're exactly right. It should send them back to the drawing board on the fundamentals of the business model. And that's the issue. And now the mechanics of fundraising can be taught, which is how do you present, how do you speak the language of the investors. I had to learn that just as much as anyone else, and I made plenty of mistakes along the way. And there are TiE and other organizations have so many experienced entrepreneurs who are delighted to coach
Right.
people, just to see other successes here.
I'm jumping the gun here. I'm going straight to scalability. From a startup to scale. So you have options where you can exit at 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, or multi-100 million. The scale becomes very critical, and most of the time the founders are not the right people to
Right.
take you there.
That's right.
In between you will have maybe 1, 2 or more to
Right.
take you there. Just wanted to learn that element because you exited at a very high level.
We did. So we created what was the first tech unicorn in the first privately, the first $1 billion+ sale of a privately held tech firm in the Midwest. And I think I was one of the rare people who stayed from the founder to the final exit. It was a 15-year journey. And you asked a question about scalability. There are two types of scalability problems. One is that of the organization itself. Can it grow? But the other is a personal. Can you scale as a person? And can the rest of the team scale? And you start to hit the limits of one way of thinking when you get to 50. I think the break points that I felt were when you get to 25, 30, 35 people, you can't manage them all yourself. And that's the first break point you reach. And the entrepreneur, or maybe it's 50, an entrepreneur then has to decide, can I learn to work through other people, or do I always have to be involved in anything? And that's when one set of people drop off. And the same thing happens at maybe 100 and so on. And each time, I believe, what is tested is your ability to hire really good people, empower them. That's the first test. The second test is to train them to hire really good people and empower them. And you can fail at each stage, and that's really the scalability issue. After you've gotten to a few hundred people, the problem becomes considerably easier because at that stage the organization then becomes a learning organization.
And personally for you, now that you exited, I'm sure there are many options. What satisfies you more now?
It's a good question. I've spent the better part of the last year or so since I have left SAP Fieldglass thinking about that. And I'll tell you what doesn't excite me is the thought of just for using my entrepreneurial skills to build another business. I can do that. I've done that. So now the mission of the business becomes much more important, and I'll stay open to starting a company if that happens. But what I think we all have a duty for is in some way use our skills to better the community in which we succeeded. And the community, and my skills happen to be entrepreneurial, so I spend a lot of time helping other entrepreneurs, investing in them. I tend to do it mostly in and around Chicago just to save on travel, frankly. But I chair a private equity firm's advisory board. I'm on 2 other venture firms' advisory boards. So I stay connected to the community. And a number of philanthropic activities that are very close to me. That's what I do right now.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.